Good day everyone, this is Justin from the RC and Coffee YouTube channel and Facebook page. If you haven't done so already, please consider supporting us by subscribing to our YouTube channel and to our Facebook page. So today I have my GCM Racing mug, very suitable for a YouTube channel that is called RC and Coffee, obviously filled with coffee. And we'll talk about a topic that is misunderstood, that I hear about a lot, but I don't see a lot of concrete answers to the questions that we'll be discussing. So today we'll chat about the Arrma Felony and the Arrma Limitless and how they are different, what differentiates them. The irony is that the only thing that I have that pertains to an Arrma Limitless and an Arrma Felony is, or Infraction actually, because that's a little bit of the same setup, is the body of my Limitless, because it's currently getting worked on. Not an issue at all. This Traxxas X01 has very much the same setup as the Limitless, and the King motor right here, the Subaru right there, will have the same setup as the Infraction or a Felony, so we'll be able to discuss the two drivetrains. So what's the difference between the drivetrain between the Arrma Felony and the Arrma Limitless? The Arrma Limitless being today the X01 and the Felony being the Subaru. Without further ado, let's have a look. All right, I'm going to move that coffee out of the way. All right, so what do we notice? First and foremost, we noticed that there is a bar here that's running from the rear of the vehicle to the front of the vehicle. This bar is called a spool. If we take a look at the Subaru instead, we notice that no such bar is present. However, there is here a differential, which is connected to a rear differential there through a shaft, and a front differential here that is connected to the middle differential also through a shaft. And that is the major difference between the Arrma Felony and the Arrma Limitless. The Felony has a similar setup to the Subaru. It has a differential at the front, a central differential in a rear differential, whereas the Limitless has a spool setup that connects the rear to the front differential. So how does that work? How does that differentiate one from the other? Well, as the name suggests, a differential enables for a different speed or a variance in speed to take place either in the front or the rear axle. That's why we call it differentials. It enables the speed to be different. The spool doesn't have that capacity. It basically sends power in a uniform manner, and it cannot be altered or changed. So technically, this setup, a spool with two differentials, is very similar to what you would see in a 4x4 pickup. And that is the difference between a 4x4 system and an all-wheel drive system that we have here. A 4x4 system always sends the same amount of power to the front or the rear axles without the ability to differentiate or vary the amount of power or torque. In the case of a center differential or all-wheel drive, that the proportion of torque or power can be altered and can be changed through a variety of means or through different situations. Now, the standard setup of a spool is a 50-50 split between the front and the rear. The standard setup of a setup with three differentials, well, there's no standard setup because it is completely connected to, or linked, or in correlation rather, to the type of oil that you put in the center differential, the traction condition, the road condition, the type of tires that you have, the difference in surface. Say you're driving on a surface that has a greater traction on one end, less traction on the other. All of these variables have an impact on the amount of power and torque that actually gets delivered to one axle to the next. So before I go into further details, I'd like to demonstrate how it acts in real life by attempting to, so I'll be locking the rear end of the car, and I'll try to turn the front wheels, and you'll see a difference. So we'll start with the X01, which is here to mimic our Limitless. So I'm putting my elbows on the rear wheels so that they can't turn. They're locked. And here am I attempting to turn the front wheels. So I'll just move that here. There's no way, it's locked. There's no way for me to differentiate the speed at which the rear wheels are turning, which is 0 right now, to the front. So that's the concept of a spool. They have to, the same amount of power and torque has to be applied on both axles. If we try to do the same thing with a setup with 3 differential, with a center differential, you'll notice that my front wheels, actually, yeah, it's my front, they're turning. The rear ones, they're not doing anything. I'm able to apply a different amount of power and torque and a different wheel speed to the front relative to the rear. So, what if we were to put an oil in the center differential or grease that would mimic a 50-50 split? Theoretically, it is possible to mimic a 50-50 split between the front and the rear axle, just like this Straxus X01 or the Limitless. But that's only in theory. It's this concept is only possible at standstill. Let's just say that 100,000 CST oil is what's needed to gain a 50-50 split on this car. That applies on at a standstill. The second you start driving, the second you start pulling on the trigger, the amount of traction that each wheel has becomes different. You may go over gravel on one wheel. You may have, be on tarmac on the other wheel. It'll behave differently. The amount of power that the differential will be able to send either to the front or the rear will change rather, simply because those 4 wheels are acting completely differently at any given time. It'll be a function of traction, of weight, of resistance within the differential itself. There's a bunch of variables, but that is not the case with a spool setup, because the spool setup is by definition locked. It is simply a bar that transfers power from one axle to the other. Something else, so something to think about when you're going to be picking, either a center diff setup or a spool setup. The spool setup will essentially will make the car very stable. It'll track like an arrow, it'll be stable, but it will not like to turn. It will not like to turn because as soon as you engage in a turn, the front, the rear, the sides are doing completely different things. The speeds at which each wheel has to turn starts to change, but with that setup, you're getting the same amount of power to the front as you're getting to the back. So you'll feel like the car is kind of fighting itself, and it'll understeer a lot more. Whereas this one will feel a lot looser and a lot more controllable. You'll be able to drift it easier. However, I'm not completely convinced that it'll be easier to keep it in a drift. It'll feel looser, it'll feel more nimble, it'll be a better car to drive around a track when set up properly, simply because it's able to adjust and behave according to the situation, whereas this one is better in straight line. Not to say that it can't take turns and curves, it can, it absolutely can. It has well enough power to be able to power steer, no problem at all. But it's a much more unidimensional experience. It's an experience that you can't alter as much as this one. Here, if you put really thick oil in the center diff, it'll shift a lot of the power to the back. If you put really light oil in the center diff, it'll shift a lot of power to the front. So depending on your weight, your battery placement, the type of setup that you have with regards to your electronics and the weight distribution, you're actually able to manage the car and set it up in a fashion that is more appropriate given your application. Whereas this one is, again, is a bit more of a one-trick pony. It's 50-50 and that's it. So which one would I pick personally? Well, it really depends. I personally prefer a spool setup when I'm driving in high traction conditions. I just feel that at these speeds, I mean, proportionally speaking, it's almost as if you were driving a car that goes 600 kilometers an hour, even though it only goes to, this one goes to 160. It's just more controllable. That artificially induced understeer makes it easier to control. At the end of the day, we're not piloting these cars from inside the car, we're at a distance, and having that built-in understeer makes it a lot more predictable. However, in terms of fun factor, it's definitely a lot of fun to be drifting this car around. The handling is fantastic. You tweak something, it behaves differently, so you have the pleasure and the to be able to discover how your car will behave depending on how you set it up. So those are the big differences between the two. Again, a spool setup, very similar to four-wheel drive. A center differential setup, very similar to an all-wheel drive system. That would be the biggest difference. So essentially, your Limitless pretty much drives like a F-150 with the center, with the transfer case engaged, and this one probably drives a lot more like your actual Subaru. So that's that. Now, this Subaru happens to be for sale. Nothing wrong with it. As you can see, it's in mint conditions. The tires are in great condition. I think it drove probably 3 times, give or take. It's in perfect condition. I'm simply renewing the fleet so that I have more material to show you guys. So tires A1, everything A1, electronics A1. The car is clean. It'll come with a brand new FlySky GT3B transmitter. The receiver is already in. The ESC has already been recalibrated. Everything works as it should. And the body is in A1 condition. As you can tell, absolutely no cracks, very few scuffs. The stickers are there. And by the way, the quality of the body is fantastic compared to the Traxxas X01, which is literally paper thin. So there's that. What do I like about this car besides the body? The chassis is amazing. It's fantastic. It's literally bulletproof. There's very little twist. Actually, it's incredibly rigid. And it's a setup that makes a lot of sense. The suspensions, and this King motor chassis is actually an HPI Apache chassis that has been converted and adapted for road. It's very interesting because it has significant travel, but the dampeners are perfectly set up for really what I would describe as an outstanding handling car. Very rigid chassis, as I said. The setup is a 1900 kV motor. It's brushless, of course. The ESC has 120 amps. It'll do 100 kilometers an hour, 60 miles with a 19-teeth pinion. You can fit in, so the battery tray is movable. You can, turn into a bigger compartment or smaller one. I fit 2 3S, 1 big 6S in there, no problem at all. Besides that, it's in A1 condition. Great car. Selling it to renew the fleet, and it's already got the EC5 connectors connected there. So if you have any interest, please contact me. There will be a link below, and it is actually currently posted on Marketplace. It's been 2-3 days, give or take. So that's that. The difference between Arrma Felony, Arrma Infraction, and the Limitless, using a Traxxas X01 and the King Motor Explorer 2.0, that's actually the name of that car, to demonstrate the difference between a spool setup and a center diff. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.